Happy Monday, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here again. This is our last of 3 Bible studies that we have pre-recorded. Once again, I'm actually, right now, as I speak with you, I'm in the air, actually on the way towards Sioux Falls. So,
Well, welcome back. We hope it was a good wedding.
I do too. I'm sure that marriage happened, and yeah, we'll be glad to be home. But all that said, we're glad that you've joined us here today. Even if we're not with you, I'm sure Clint will be in the comments, so feel free to make any comments or questions. Stump the pastor here today.
Yep, and we will be back live tomorrow, and for whatever it's worth, that's the plan.
That's the plan. We now turn back to the book of Mark as we continue our study together. We are picking up at Mark chapter 1, verse 29 today.
Just a little recap. You might remember that last Friday we talked about this first healing story in Mark, a man with an unclean spirit. Today we get some other healing stories, some medical. There will be some other exorcisms as well, but really a connection and an extension. The first story set the stage, if you remember, that Jesus had authority, that he not only taught, but that he acted as one who was different than the other religious leaders in that he had the power to enact healing and health for people. And today we move into an extension of that. And I would say more so, though the authority of Jesus is in the background, I would say, Michael, today is more so about just the kind of numbers of people that Jesus heals and the extent to which his power is making its way out into the world and into the lives of those in need.
Yeah, we probably don't use the word proclamation in our common vernacular very often, but I think it's a fitting word for what's happening here, that Jesus's actions and his words are all about spreading and disseminating this good news that comes because of Jesus Christ. And so what we have next is this story in which we're introduced to how quickly that message spreads.
Yeah, absolutely. And, keep in mind, we've said this about Mark, lots of urgency kind of language. So we get it here in verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. So again, we get this urgency. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. So here we have Jesus finding a need by the connection with his disciples. Simon's mother-in-law is in bed. It would not have been unusual for many members of a family to be in a house together. And she has a fever. We're not told what that is related to or if that's the extent of her condition, but she's bedridden. It's serious enough to keep the woman of the house down, which in most households says something about the severity of it. And Jesus simply touches her by the hand and lifts her up. And there's some beautiful imagery here, both Jesus taking her hand and lifting her, the idea that she's being lifted up, lifted above the sickness, lifted above the suffering and the struggle, and that she's really, the imagery here, I think, Michael, is that she's being set free.
Yeah, at the end of verse 31, the fever has left her and she begins to serve them. And that is really just the extent to which the healing was effective. You had someone who was in bed, who was incapacitated, now able to get up to work, to serve the people in that room, in that place, a large crowd even. So I think we see how quickly and how completely Jesus's power is able to right her broken body.
Yeah, and there's maybe an intersection moment here because she is likely the woman of the house. It's her job to welcome guests. Hospitality falls under her job description. And we could grumble about that a little bit and maybe say it's not fair to her, or that maybe that's, an unfortunate reality of their society. And And those things may be true, but I think we shouldn't miss the connection of healing and serving, the idea that Jesus restores her, and her first instinct is to show gratitude by serving others, by reaching out, by doing those things that hopefully she loved and enjoyed doing and doing them well. And I think while we can be sensitive to the context of this woman's culture, I think we wouldn't want to just simply read over the idea that Mark has put together being healed with being a servant, because that is an important piece of the gospel and one that we'll see again.
Yeah, Clint, this is a point that we made back on Friday that I think is relevant here once again. We live in a time and in a moment where the medical diagnosis gets a lot of time. Well, what did the doctors say it was? And in the ancient world, it was less about naming a thing properly, and it was more about the reality that that thing was happening, right? This woman was sick, and Jesus's ability to heal her really reveals to us the extent to which his authority goes. We saw that it was certainly applicable to this man who was demon possessed, and now it applies to a fever, to physical symptoms of sickness. Jesus is able to right that. And as we talked about at the beginning of today's conversation, Clint, we're now going to jump right into how quickly that word spreads. When Jesus shows up and he teaches like one who has authority, and when he acts like someone with authority, that has a way of getting out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the really where we go from here is we've seen the things that Jesus can do, Michael, and it seems like now Mark wants to kind of give us the degree by which they start happening. So verse 32, that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door, and he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. And let's stop there for a moment. So this is a matter of scale. This is going to happen to Jesus over and over again. The word about him spreads so quickly that entire towns and villages come out to see him. There's not room for people. There's crowds. There's chaos. And it has to do with Jesus' notoriety, though it's important, and we'll see in a moment, that Jesus is not seeking to have hundreds of people with him. That is an extension of the work that he's doing and the gifts that he is providing, the gifts of healing he is providing for people. But the response is tremendous.
Yeah, and there's actually a little bit of a Markan sandwich in this. If you think about this, you have Jesus going into the synagogue where he teaches and he casts out this demon. And then following worship, ostensibly, he goes and he heals Simon's mother-in-law, who's in bed with a fever. And then it says at sunset, rather, which would mean that now people would be free to move after the Sabbath again. That's when all of these people then bring the sick, the demon-possessed to Jesus. So it's almost like you have a healing story interspersed in between these two pieces, the beginning of worship at the synagogue and the end of that day. And you can almost imagine all of these people spread throughout the countryside who heard about this demon-possessed man who had been set free, and they were just waiting for the first moment when they could leave their homes, when the travel restrictions of the Sabbath customs and laws were lifted for the day, and they could bring their loved ones to Jesus to be healed. There's this sense of urgency, once again, that we see within this.
Absolutely. And so there is a swarm of people, some of them sick, and they're being healed. And then there are exorcisms. And then let's jump to the end of that verse, Michael, because this, I think, is the first real instance we've seen of what gets called Mark's secret, or the Markan secret. And it says, he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Now, we had a conversation Friday about Jesus not allowing evil to speak in his presence. And there is some of that is happening here. But at another level, this introduces a thing that we're going to see repeatedly in this gospel, someone understands who Jesus is or sees Jesus do something, and Jesus tells them, don't tell anyone. And in this case, he orders the demons not to be able to speak because they knew him. And that seems strange to us. It seems odd that Jesus doesn't want people out there telling them who he is. But the way Mark structures the gospel, Mark wants to save that sort of proclamation and that idea of awareness for later in the story. And we'll see this over and over again, but I think this is the first best instance we've seen of it.
Yeah, in some ways, tell me if you disagree with this, Clint. I feel like Mark and John really conceive of that message spreading in different ways. John, the gospel, is built upon this idea that those who see Jesus witness to who he is. In Mark, really, Jesus doesn't want anyone else speaking to his authority. He doesn't need witnesses. Jesus' authority and power is so great, so real, so present that he himself can reveal what he's about. And there's a sense in which that plays into the Mark in secret, I think.
Yeah, and this may be overstated, Michael. I've never thought about it like this, but you raise a good point. It may be possible to defend the idea that where John is fascinated and sees the importance of witnesses, Mark is more interested in witness and witnessing. And what I mean by that is Mark is very much a first-person kind of reading. Mark's Jesus seems to want people to see it for themselves as opposed to hear about it from someone else. And in the other Gospels, we have this idea that people are sent out there to spread the word. In Mark, it's just the opposite. Don't tell anyone. They'll know it when they see it. And again, not to keep teasing the ending, but ultimately, I think the ending is going to put us in a place where we can understand that in a pretty interesting way. But I think that's fair. And so it happens here. If it seems odd, I can only tell you, get used to it. You're going to see it again and again and again. Yeah,
and I think maybe the concluding thought that I would have on this section, Clint, is Jesus doesn't want the demons revealing who he is.
No.
He has no place in demons revealing the Son of God. He's going to do that. And that goes back to your point that you made a few days ago. We need reminded that in all of Scripture, but certainly we see it here, there is no power that rivals Jesus's power. There's not some cosmic fight happening here. I mean, that when Jesus shows up and God makes that pronouncement, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased," battle over. And that's a thing we're going to see throughout this entire gospel.
Absolutely. So then we move out of this house, verse 35. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and he went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. This is something we see Jesus do regularly in the Scripture. Jesus has these moments where he gets away from the crowd, gets away even from the disciples. He finds a place of solitude, and he finds moments of reflection, generally spending those times in prayer. Sometimes we'll hear the details of that. Most often in Mark, we won't. We'll simply see Jesus extricate himself from the crowd in order to have these moments of fellowship with God. And this is the first instance we see of it here. And Simon and the companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." And he answered, "Let us go to the neighboring towns, that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. There is in the gospel this kind of temptation moment. In fact, in one of the gospels, they even try to make Jesus king by force. This temptation moment where Jesus is looking at followers and he can sort of become the mascot of a town or an area. And in every case, of course, with no surprise, Jesus refuses that. And Jesus says, I'm not here to be a regional celebrity. I have a mission, and that mission is actually universal. It's to the world. It's not simply to this place, to Galilee, to Judea, to any specific area. And so Jesus, when they say everyone's looking for you, Jesus, who can be a little contrary in Mark to start with, says, yeah, let's go somewhere else. And it's an interesting approach, but the idea is Jesus is trying to proclaim something far beyond the boundaries of any one place.
Yes, and the reality that these people are looking for him really proves that he did what he came to do. He has revealed so much so that people are now drawn to him, which in Mark, that's exactly what you expect. Jesus reveals himself as the Son of God. People are drawn to him. Now it's time to move on so that, as we see here in verse 38, and I quote, I may proclaim the message. Who's proclaiming? Jesus is proclaiming the message. And so he's going to go on to the next place to do that. But I see something similar to what we have in Acts here. You just see the circle widening, right? Jesus is going around in a particular place. We were told at the beginning here that he was in Capernaum. And then he goes to Simon's house. And now we have this idea that the people come and they bring all their sick to Jesus there. But now we have this idea that we're moving out throughout Galilee. We're going out into the surrounding region. And so the message is being spread in concentric circles. It's getting out there. And really, if you put this in context, Clint, we're at verse 39 here, and we have covered a lot of ground.
Yes, and I think a case can be made, Michael, and I'll make it loosely because I can't guarantee this is true, but I believe it to be true, and tell me if you disagree, that having done this now, Mark introduces the idea of healing with an individual, and then we get crowds. We get crowds throughout a whole region of people who have been healed and who have been set free of demons. And really, it's like Mark is in some ways done with the healing part of Jesus' story. And the healing stories that come throughout most of the rest of the gospel are going to be individuals. They're going to be related to certain conversations. They're going to have lessons in them. But the idea, again, Mark has taken us very quickly in just 2 or 3 stories to another level of Jesus' ministry. He healed a leper. He cast out a demon. He healed a mother-in-law. He healed hundreds and thousands. And now he's on to something else. And Mark is rushing us through that story. And when we look at healings primarily from this point on, it will be not through the telescope, but through the microscope. It will be very specific stories. And there will be lots of them. I don't mean Jesus is done with healing. I mean that the big picture of trying to establish that Jesus is a healer is largely finished for Mark, and he will go on to specific snapshots of that from here.
Yeah, and I think maybe the only comment that I have left to make here, Clint, is that the pace that we're on right now may, on one hand, seem to sort of undercut the point. In other words, why rush to establish Jesus' sovereignty, his all-powerful nature so early in the story? And the answer for that is, once again, going to come later in the story, that these things that Jesus are doing could so easily be misinterpreted as shows of power to get people behind him. And I think you used the word kingmaker, right? Like that people see it, they want to put Jesus in charge because they're excited about him. But Jesus's real nature and authority have yet to be seen. We've seen his nature and authority, but the fullness of that is going to come in surprising turns at the end of the story. And I think this is already setting us up for it. That's the amazing part of Mark's gospel, is just how quickly we're already wrapped up in the story, which we're going to be surprised by later.
Yeah, and I think as we move toward the end of chapter 1, Mark has given us most of the big picture information. He's introduced us to Jesus, his mission, his teaching, his authority, his healing, his exorcism, his popularity. And now Mark will begin to narrow the focus. And I think you'll notice over the next couple chapters that the stories become a little smaller, often with an individual or a couple of people. They become a little longer, maybe 10 verses instead of 3 or 2. And they become more specific in that there tends to be a point that can be taken out of almost either one. Having shown us the big picture, Mark now gives us the specific snapshots and says, let me tell you what the big picture means in the smaller sense. And I think that's reasonable. I think you'll see that over the next few chapters.
Well, we will leave that to our future conversations. Thanks for being with us today, friends. Hope there's something encouraging and interesting in this conversation. We look forward to being with you in person tomorrow as we study again at 2 o'clock Central.
Thanks for joining us, and be blessed.
Thank you for joining us for this daily Bible study. If this is your first time, welcome. We are so glad that you have joined us for this time of intentional study of God's Word. You will find in the description of this video a link to our website. We would love to get to know who you are. We'd love to reach out and greet you personally, but be sure, whether or not this is your first time, to like this video. If you're on Facebook, share it so that other people might be able to find it too. If you're on YouTube, consider subscribing. You'll receive more content like this every day at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. On top of that, every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we release a Pastor Talk podcast, which goes through different series, but all of them about faith and life and discipleship of Jesus Christ. Friends, regardless of how many times you've been with us, we hope that this day has been meaningful for you as you seek to follow Jesus Christ. So until next time, be blessed. We look forward to seeing you soon.